Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
This happened about 4 years ago when my daughter was almost 4 years old. My wife and I had been dealing with what I like to call the Great Sticker Crisis for about 3 days straight. Let me back up a bit to explain how we got to this point. My daughter had just discovered the joy of sticker books. You know the kind, those little books filled with hundreds of tiny stickers that somehow multiply when you're not looking. We bought her one at the grocery store, thinking it would keep her busy for a few hours. Big mistake. She went through that entire book in one afternoon, decorating everything she could reach. The walls, the coffee table, the TV stand, even the dog got a few butterfly stickers on his fur. At first, my wife and I thought it was cute. Our little girl was being creative and having fun. But then we bought her another sticker book the next day because she begged for it at the store. That one disappeared even faster than the first. Stickers were showing up in the strangest places, inside the medicine cabinet, on the bathroom mirror, stuck to the bottom of our shoes. By day 3, when she had somehow managed to empty yet another entire sticker book, my wife had reached her breaking point. She was finding stickers everywhere, and I mean everywhere. They were on the kitchen cabinets, the refrigerator handle, the light switches, even inside the microwave. The final straw came when my wife opened the pantry and found stickers covering half the cereal boxes. That morning, my wife sat our daughter down at the kitchen table for what she called a serious talk. I was getting ready for work, but I could hear the conversation from the hallway. My wife started by telling our daughter they needed to talk about the stickers. My daughter immediately got excited and said she loved stickers because they were pretty. My wife acknowledged that she knew our daughter liked them, but explained that she couldn't put stickers all over the house anymore because mommy was tired of having to peel them off everything. Our daughter protested that the stickers made everything look nice. My wife then laid down the new rule: from now on, stickers could only go on paper. Our daughter complained that this wasn't fair and said she wanted to put them everywhere. My wife apologized but said the rule was final: stickers only went on paper, and no more stickers on the walls, furniture, or anything else in the house. My daughter started to argue more, but my wife was done. She had spent the better part of 3 days scraping stickers off surfaces, and some of them were leaving sticky residue that was a pain to clean. I could tell from my wife's tone that this wasn't up for discussion. Our daughter asked what would happen if she put them on something else, but my wife repeated that it was paper only and that was final. I left for work thinking that would be the end of it. My daughter was smart, but she was still just 3 years old. How creative could she really get with this rule? Well, I found out when I came home for lunch about an hour later. I walked into the kitchen to grab a sandwich and immediately noticed something was different about our refrigerator. It was covered in what looked like dozens of small yellow squares. When I got closer, I realized what I was seeing. My daughter had taken a stack of post-it notes and covered each one with stickers. Then she had stuck all the post-it notes to the refrigerator door. The entire front of our refrigerator was covered in these sticker-decorated post-it notes. There were princess stickers, flower stickers, animal stickers, and star stickers. Each post-it note had been carefully arranged with different stickers, and then the whole collection had been applied to the fridge like some kind of elaborate art installation. My daughter was standing in front of her masterpiece with the biggest, proudest grin I had ever seen on her face. She looked like she had just solved world hunger. She excitedly told me to look at what she had made. I was genuinely impressed and asked how she had thought of this idea. She explained that mommy had said she could only put stickers on paper, and post-it notes were paper. I had to admit the kid had a point. Technically, post-it notes were paper. She had found a loophole in the rule and exploited it like a tiny lawyer. I told her it was very creative and asked what mommy thought about this. She said her mom hadn't seen it yet because she wanted it to be a surprise. Just then, my wife walked into the kitchen. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the refrigerator. For a moment, I thought she might be upset. Then I saw her shoulders start to shake. She was trying not to laugh. My wife asked what this was, clearly confused by the sight. Our daughter proudly announced that she had followed the rule because mommy said stickers only went on paper and post-it notes were paper. My wife looked at me, then back at our daughter, then at the refrigerator covered in dozens of sticker-decorated post-it notes. My wife admitted that our daughter was absolutely right. Post-it notes were indeed paper. Our daughter asked if that meant she hadn't broken the rule. My wife confirmed that no, she hadn't broken the rule, but asked that next time maybe she should ask mommy before redecorating the refrigerator. Our daughter agreed and then asked if my wife liked her creation. My wife grabbed her phone and took a picture of our daughter standing next to her creation. That photo captured the biggest, most mischievous grin you could imagine. It was the look of a kid who knew she had pulled off something spectacular. My wife told our daughter that she thought it was very creative and that she had found a way to follow the rule and still have fun with her stickers. The refrigerator stayed decorated like that for about a week. Every time I opened it to get milk or grab a snack, I smiled. It was such a perfect example of how kids think, so literal and so creative at the same time. Eventually, my wife and I decided we needed to modify the sticker rule to be more specific. We designated a special poster board that could be covered in stickers, and we moved the sticker books to a shelf where they could be used only with permission. But we never forgot the great post-it note incident of 4 years ago. I actually showed my daughter that photo just yesterday. She's almost 8 now, and when I told her the story, she burst out laughing. She said that totally sounded like something she would do. I agreed that she had been pretty proud of herself. She laughed and said she had been smart because she found the loophole. And you know what? She was right. She had been smart. This story happened about 5 years ago, but I only learned all the details recently when I ran into my old battle buddy at a reunion. I was stationed at Fort Campbell with the 101st Airborne Division. Our unit had this sergeant major who was obsessed with discipline and setting examples. This guy had been in the army for over 20 years and acted like he was the personal enforcer of military regulations. He had this saying that he would repeat at every single formation about how regardless of the circumstance, if you did something wrong, you should get punished. He'd go on and on about how even if other people didn't get caught or punished, if you got caught, you deserved whatever was coming to you. According to him, eventually karma would catch up with everyone who broke the rules. My friend had been in the same company as me since we both arrived at the base 2 years earlier. He was a solid soldier, never caused trouble, always did his job. But like everyone else, he wasn't perfect. The problem started during a rough month when our unit was dealing with a lot of disciplinary issues. Several soldiers had been showing up late to morning formation, and the command was getting fed up. One morning, my friend's alarm didn't go off. His phone had died during the night and he woke up 20 minutes after formation was supposed to start. He threw on his uniform and sprinted to the formation area, but he was still 15 minutes late. Any other month, this might have resulted in a minor counseling or maybe some push-ups, but the sergeant major had decided he needed to make an example of someone. When my friend arrived, out of breath and apologizing, the sergeant major didn't even let him explain. The sergeant major made some sarcastic comment about how nice it was that my friend had decided to join them that day. My friend tried to apologize and explain that his phone had died and his alarm didn't go off and that he came as soon as he woke up. But the sergeant major cut him off, asking if he had requested excuses or explanations. When my friend said no, the sergeant major reminded him of his favorite saying about punishment regardless of circumstances. The sergeant major went on this long speech in front of the entire company about how my friend was going to serve as an example to everyone else. He talked about personal responsibility and how the army couldn't function if soldiers just made excuses whenever they screwed up. The whole time, my friend just stood there at attention, taking it. The punishment was severe. My friend got assigned to 30 days of extra duty, which meant he had to report for additional work every evening after his regular duties were finished. On top of that, he received an Article 15, which is non-judicial punishment that resulted in a reduction in rank and a fine of about $2,000 for being late to one formation because his phone died. I felt terrible for him. It seemed like such an excessive punishment for what was clearly an honest mistake. But the sergeant major was adamant about making his point. He even referenced his favorite saying again during the punishment ceremony, explaining that this was what happened when you failed to meet Army standards. He said he didn't want to hear about alarm clocks or dead phones or any other excuses because my friend had a responsibility and failed to meet it. My friend took the punishment without complaint. He served his extra duty, paid his fine, and moved on. I was impressed by how professionally he handled the whole situation. He never bad-mouthed the sergeant major or complained about the unfairness of it all. He just did his time and kept his head down. About a month after my friend's punishment ended, something interesting started happening. My friend began getting text messages from his cousin who lived in the town just outside the base. She had been dating someone she'd met at a local bar, and it turned out this someone was a married Army sergeant major. She didn't know which unit he was from at first, but when she mentioned his name, my friend realized it was our sergeant major. His cousin started sharing details about their relationship. She sent him photos of expensive gifts the sergeant major had bought her, screenshots of romantic text messages, and even pictures of them together at hotels. She thought she was just sharing gossip with family, but my friend quickly realized he was looking at evidence of adultery, which is a serious crime under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. For weeks, my friend sat on this information. He could have easily ignored it or told his cousin to be more discreet, but then he remembered something. He remembered standing at attention while the sergeant major lectured him about personal responsibility and facing punishment for your actions. He remembered losing $2,000 and spending 30 days doing extra duty because his phone died. Most importantly, he remembered the sergeant major's favorite saying about punishment regardless of circumstances. My friend decided the sergeant major should follow his own advice. He carefully compiled all the evidence his cousin had sent him. Text messages with timestamps, photos with metadata, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, everything that proved the sergeant major was having an extramarital affair. Then he did something that took real courage. He sent copies of everything to the sergeant major's commanding officer and to the sergeant major's wife. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within a week, the sergeant major was called in for questioning. The evidence was overwhelming, and adultery in the military isn't just frowned upon. It's a court-martial offense. The sergeant major tried to deny it at first, but the photos and messages made that impossible. When confronted, my friend told the sergeant major that he thought the sergeant major should face the same standard he had held my friend to. He reminded him of his own words about punishment regardless of circumstances. The sergeant major's career was over. He was given the choice between facing a court-martial or taking early retirement. He chose retirement, but it came at a massive cost. He lost his pension benefits, his rank, and his marriage. His wife divorced him and took half of everything, including his projected retirement benefits. Financial experts estimated he lost around $500,000 in total compensation over his lifetime. My friend never broke a single regulation or law. He simply reported criminal activity to the appropriate authorities exactly like military regulations required him to do. He followed proper channels and provided evidence of misconduct. He did everything by the book. When I learned about all this at our reunion, I had to smile. The sergeant major had spent years preaching about personal responsibility and facing punishment for your actions. In the end, he got exactly what he'd been dishing out to everyone else. My friend had simply taken the sergeant major's own philosophy and applied it fairly and equally. The irony was perfect. The man who'd made a career out of punishing others for minor infractions ended up losing everything because he couldn't follow the same standards he demanded from his subordinates. I spent summers at my grandfather's farm in rural Pennsylvania. After college, I moved back to help him run the place since his arthritis was getting worse and he couldn't handle all the work alone. The farm had been in our family for 3 generations, 70 acres of crops, a small orchard, and some livestock including cattle and sheep. My grandfather was a tough old man who'd worked the land his whole life. He didn't take nonsense from anyone, but he was fair and kind to people who showed him respect. The farm was clearly marked as private property with signs posted every 50 feet along the main road, and we had a gate at the entrance that stayed locked unless we were expecting deliveries or visitors. Last month, I was in the barn fixing a broken water trough when I heard my grandfather shouting from the front yard. I dropped my tools and ran outside to see what was happening. There was a woman in her 40s standing near our apple trees with a large canvas bag, picking apples and stuffing them inside. My grandfather was walking toward her with his cattle prod in hand. He always carried it when checking on the livestock. My grandfather told the woman she needed to leave the property immediately because this was private land. The woman turned around and looked at him like he was crazy. She had short blonde hair and was wearing expensive-looking clothes that seemed out of place on a farm. She told him that this was public land and she had every right to be here. My grandfather corrected her, saying this was his farm and she was trespassing. He pointed out that there were signs posted everywhere. The woman dismissed his words, claiming those signs didn't mean anything. She said that all farmland was public property and she was taking the apples as a souvenir. She said he couldn't stop her. I walked over to stand beside my grandfather, trying to keep things calm. I explained to her that there had been a misunderstanding and this was definitely private property. I told her my family owned this land and she needed to put the apples back and leave. The woman said she didn't care what we thought we owned. She declared she wasn't leaving without her souvenirs and that the apples were free for anyone to take. She continued filling her bag, completely ignoring us. My grandfather's face was getting red. My grandfather asked her one last time to leave his property. The woman responded by telling him she wasn't going anywhere. She challenged him to call the police if he wanted, but said she was taking what she came for. That's when she made her biggest mistake. Instead of just leaving with the apples, she got aggressive. She stepped toward my grandfather and shoved him hard in the chest. At 82 years old, he stumbled backward and nearly fell. I reached out to steady him, and that's when he'd had enough. My grandfather said that was it and asked if she wanted to play rough. He activated the cattle prod and jabbed it into her side. She screamed and jumped back, but he wasn't done. When she tried to charge at him again, he zapped her in the arm. She fell to her knees, cursing and screaming. The woman yelled that he couldn't do this to her and threatened to sue us for everything we had. My grandfather replied that she had assaulted an elderly man on his own property and told her to try explaining that to a judge. She got back up and tried to grab the bag of apples she'd dropped, but my grandfather zapped her again in the leg. This time she went down hard and stayed down, writhing on the ground and screaming about how we were going to pay for this. I ran inside and called 911 while my grandfather kept the cattle prod ready in case she tried to get up again. She was still on the ground, moaning and complaining when the police arrived 20 minutes later. The first officer was someone we knew from town, Officer Johnson, who'd grown up on a farm himself. He took one look at the situation and started laughing. He asked what had happened there. I explained that the woman had trespassed on our property, stolen our apples, and assaulted my grandfather when he told her to leave. The woman immediately complained that we had attacked her with some kind of weapon and demanded that we be arrested. Officer Johnson told her it was a livestock prod, which was a standard farm tool. He asked if she had entered the property without permission. The woman said this was public land and she had every right to be here. The officer walked over to the nearest fence post and pointed at the clearly visible sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing." He told her this was definitely private property and she was trespassing. The woman argued that the signs were fake and all farms were public property. Officer Johnson explained that wasn't how property ownership worked and told her she needed to come with him. The paramedics checked her out and said she was fine. The cattle prod had left some red marks but no serious injuries. While they were examining her, she kept demanding that we be arrested for assault. The woman told Officer Johnson she wanted to press charges because we had electrocuted her. The officer explained that she had trespassed, stolen property, and assaulted an elderly man. He said the cattle prod was used in self-defense on private property. My grandfather walked over to the officer with a grim expression. He said he wanted to press charges against her for trespassing, theft, and assault. Officer Johnson told him that was his right, and they would take her statement at the station. When they loaded her into the police car, she was still screaming about how unfair everything was and how she was going to sue us into poverty. She kept saying that farms were public property and that we had no right to stop her from taking whatever she wanted. The case went to court 3 weeks later. She actually showed up with a lawyer and tried to claim that we had assaulted her without provocation. But we had security camera footage from the barn that showed the whole incident, including her shoving my grandfather first. The judge wasn't impressed with her argument that farmland was public property. She was convicted of trespassing, theft, and assault on an elderly person. She got 6 months of community service, had to pay restitution for the stolen apples, and was banned from coming within 500 feet of our property. Watching her face when the judge explained that private property rights are fundamental to our legal system and that livestock prods are legal tools for farmers to protect themselves and their property was satisfying. She looked like she couldn't believe that her actions had results. When I get passionate about things, my voice tends to get a bit louder. Not shouting loud, just more animated than normal conversation. I honestly don't realize I'm doing it most of the time. My partner and I have been together for about 3 years now. We moved in together last year, and that's when this whole thing really started becoming a problem. They have this habit of cutting me off mid-sentence whenever they think I'm getting too loud. I work for a small marketing company, and my partner works in accounting. We're both pretty introverted, but I've been the more talkative one between us. When we first started dating, they said they loved how passionate I got about things. They said it was cute how my eyes would light up when I talked about something I cared about. But somewhere along the way, that changed. It started happening maybe 6 months ago. I come home from work, excited to tell them about a new project or something funny that happened with a client, and right in the middle of my story, they'd hold up their hand and ask me to lower my voice because I was getting really loud. The first few times it happened, I just apologized and tried to continue, but quieter, but it kept happening. Every single time I got excited about something, there they were, cutting me off to police my volume. Last week was probably the worst example. I had just finished this amazing project at work. It was for this local nonprofit that helps kids learn art, and I had spent weeks designing their new website and promotional materials. I was so proud of how it turned out, and I couldn't wait to show my partner. I rushed home that evening with my laptop practically bouncing with excitement. I started telling them about how incredible the nonprofit project turned out, how the client loved it so much. They were recommending me to 3 other organizations, and I was trying to show them this logo animation I had created. I was pulling up the files on my laptop, talking quickly because I was so excited to share this win with them. But then they interrupted me again, telling me I needed a volume check because I was being really loud right then. Just like that, all my excitement deflated. I felt my shoulders slump and suddenly I didn't want to show them my work anymore. I apologized and said I was just excited, but they reminded me that I didn't need to be so loud about it. I closed my laptop and went to the kitchen to start dinner instead. They followed me a few minutes later, asking why I seemed upset, but I didn't know how to explain it without sounding petty. This pattern kept repeating. I get excited about something, start sharing it with enthusiasm, and boom, volume police strikes again. Each time it happened, I felt more and more self-conscious. I started second-guessing myself constantly, wondering if I was being too loud, if I was being annoying, if I should just keep my excitement to myself. A few weeks ago, I finally tried to have a serious conversation about it. I asked if we could talk about something that had been bothering me. When they agreed, I explained that when they interrupted me to tell me I was being too loud, it really killed my enthusiasm. I told them I knew they didn't mean it to be hurtful, but it made me feel like they didn't want to hear what I was excited about. They insisted that wasn't true at all, saying they just wanted us to have normal conversations at normal volumes. I explained that I didn't always realize when I was getting louder because it just happened naturally when I was passionate about something. They told me I needed to be more aware of it then. I asked if they could maybe find a gentler way to let me know or maybe wait until I finished my thought before mentioning it. But they said they shouldn't have to tiptoe around my feelings just because I couldn't control my volume. That stung. But I thought maybe they had a point, so I tried harder to monitor myself. I started speaking more quietly in general, being more reserved about sharing things that excited me. But it wasn't enough. Yesterday was the final straw. My sister had just gotten engaged, and I was on the phone with her getting all the details about the proposal. It was such a sweet story, and I was so happy for her. When I hung up, I immediately wanted to share the news. I started telling them about how my sister just got engaged, and I was describing how he proposed. I explained that he took her to the place where they had their first date, and he had arranged for the restaurant to play their song. And when she turned around, he was on one knee with this gorgeous ring that belonged to his grandmother. I was beaming, so genuinely happy for my sister and excited to share this wonderful news. But then my partner snapped at me asking why I was yelling and saying it was just an engagement, not a lottery win. That's when something inside me snapped. I told them I wasn't yelling, that I was excited about my sister's engagement, which was a normal human emotion. They insisted I was absolutely yelling and that the neighbors probably heard me. I argued back that I was speaking with enthusiasm, and there was a difference. They reminded me that they had told me about this volume thing 100 times, and if I couldn't learn to speak at a normal level, maybe we needed to reconsider some things. I stared at them for a long moment, realizing something important. I agreed that we did need to reconsider some things, and I walked to our bedroom and started packing a bag. They followed me, asking what I was doing. I told them I was going to stay at my sister's for a few days because I needed to think about whether I wanted to be with someone who treated my excitement like it was a character flaw that needed to be corrected. They told me not to be dramatic, insisting they just wanted me to speak at a reasonable volume. I replied that I wanted to be with someone who didn't make me feel like I needed to dim my light to make them comfortable. They followed me around the apartment as I packed, trying to argue that they were just trying to help me be more socially aware, that other people would find my volume annoying too, that I was being oversensitive. But here's the thing, I've never had this problem with anyone else. My friends, my family, my co-workers, none of them have ever complained about my volume. In fact, most people tell me they love my energy and enthusiasm. When I was leaving, my partner made one last attempt. They told me that if I wanted to leave over something this stupid, I should go ahead, but not to come crying to them when I realized how good I had it there. I turned around at the door and told them they were right, that this was stupid. I explained that it was stupid that I had spent months walking on eggshells and dimming my personality because they decided my natural enthusiasm was somehow wrong. It was stupid that I had been made to feel bad about being excited about things I cared about. I've been at my sister's house for 3 days now, and honestly, I feel lighter than I have in months. She's been letting me gush about her engagement plans, and when I get excited and my voice gets a bit louder, she just smiles and gets excited with me. This morning, my partner texted asking when I was coming home. I'm starting to think the answer might be never. My husband and I have been annual pass holders for about 3 years now, and we love going to the parks for date nights. At 52 and 55, we're probably not your typical Disney guests, but we don't care. We earned the right to enjoy some magic after raising 3 kids and dealing with decades of corporate stress. The whole thing started because I discovered Disney bounding about a year ago through some online forums. For those who don't know, Disney bounding is when you wear regular clothes that are inspired by Disney characters without actually dressing up in costumes. It's perfect for adults who want to show their Disney love without breaking the park rules about costumes. Disney is extremely strict about this because they don't want guests confused about who are actual cast members versus regular people. My husband was skeptical at first. He's always been the practical one, the guy who rolls his eyes at my Disney obsession, but still drives me to the parks every other weekend because he loves me. But even he got into it eventually. I think he secretly enjoys having an excuse to wear funny t-shirts in public. So 2 weekends ago, we planned a nice evening at EPCOT. I have been planning my Snow White bound for weeks. I found this perfect yellow tennis skirt at Target, paired it with my favorite blue t-shirt, and added a red cardigan that I already owned. The red belt was a recent purchase, and I was especially proud of my apple-shaped purse that I found on clearance at a Disney store. It was subtle but definitely Snow White inspired. My husband went as Grumpy, which honestly fits his personality perfectly. He wore this hilarious red shirt that said something about becoming a grumpy old man and nailing it, with brown shorts and his old fishing hat. He looked absolutely nothing like the actual grumpy dwarf, just a middle-aged man in comfortable clothes with a sense of humor about getting older. We had dinner reservations at Garden Grill, which is one of our favorite restaurants. It's in the Lamb Pavilion, and we always book it months in advance because it's so popular. We were walking through the World Showcase, taking our time and enjoying the evening when we passed the German Pavilion. That's when we saw her, a woman in her 30s with two little girls, maybe around 6 and 8 years old. The girls were wearing full princess dresses, the kind that cost a fortune at the Disney stores. Their mother was dressed in what looked like expensive athleisure wear. The woman spotted us from about 20 feet away and immediately started waving her arms and calling out to us. I looked around thinking maybe she was talking to someone else, but she was definitely pointing at us. We walked over, assuming maybe she needed directions or something. She told us that her girls wanted pictures with Snow White and Grumpy. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, like she was placing an order at a restaurant. I politely explained that we weren't cast members and were just guests, like her. She asked what I meant, saying we were obviously dressed as Snow White and Grumpy. My husband tried to explain that we were Disney bounding, which meant wearing regular clothes inspired by the characters. She said she didn't care what we called it, and that her girls wanted pictures and were already excited. The two little girls were jumping up and down, clearly thinking they had found the real characters. I felt bad for them, but I also knew we needed to get out of this situation quickly. I told her I understood they were excited, but we weren't the real characters. I mentioned there was actually a meet and greet with the real Snow White over at the Princess Fairy Tale Hall in Magic Kingdom if she wanted to see her. She refused, saying they weren't going all the way to Magic Kingdom and that the line was probably hours long anyway. She demanded we just take a quick picture, claiming it would only take 2 seconds. I apologized again and explained we couldn't do that because we were late for dinner reservations. And besides, Disney had very strict rules about this kind of thing. That's when her whole demeanor changed. Her face got red and she crossed her arms. She asked if I was kidding, saying we dressed up like Disney characters, and then refused to take pictures with children. She wanted to know what kind of person does that. My husband replied that we were the kind of people who didn't work for Disney and didn't want to get kicked out of the park. She scoffed and said no one would care about one little picture. She was wrong about that. Disney absolutely cares. They have cast members all over the parks, specifically watching for this kind of thing. If they catch guests pretending to be characters, even accidentally, you can get ejected from the park and potentially lose your annual pass. We'd heard horror stories on the Disney forums about people getting in serious trouble for much less. I apologized again and said we really needed to go, suggesting maybe she could find one of the actual cast members. But she wasn't having it. When I was talking, she literally pushed her two daughters toward us and told them to stand next to Snow White and Grumpy so she could take their picture. The poor kids looked confused. They could probably tell something was wrong, but they were excited about meeting their favorite characters. I felt terrible for them, but I also felt trapped. She pulled out her phone and positioned herself to take the picture, telling us this was costing her a fortune and her kids deserved some magic. My husband and I exchanged panicked looks. We were stuck between not wanting to disappoint the children and not wanting to get ourselves in trouble with Disney. My husband said under his breath that this was exactly why he didn't go to Magic Kingdom. Despite everything, I almost laughed. Here we were, two middle-aged people being forced into an awkward photo op we never signed up for. She kept telling us to smile bigger, saying we were supposed to be happy characters. That's when I realized this woman thought we were actually employed by Disney. She wasn't just asking for a favor from fellow guests. She genuinely believed we were cast members who were refusing to do our jobs. I told her very clearly that we were not Disney employees and that we bought tickets just like she did. We were guests. She asked then why we were dressed like that, and I explained it was because we enjoyed Disney, and this was a way for adults to participate without breaking the costume rules. She said that was the stupidest thing she'd ever heard. My husband said we were leaving now, and we started walking away, but she followed us. She yelled that we couldn't just walk away because her kids were crying now. I looked back and saw that the two little girls were indeed starting to cry. They didn't understand why Snow White and Grumpy were being mean to them. It broke my heart, but I knew we had to keep walking. She shouted that the whole thing was ridiculous and she was going to report us to Disney. My husband told her to go ahead and tell them two guests were wearing color-coordinated outfits, saying he was sure they'd be fascinated. We finally made it to Garden Grill, but we were both shaken up. Our server could tell something was wrong and asked if we'd had a rough day in the parks. My husband said we could say that. We told her what happened and she shook her head, saying it happened more often than we'd think. She explained that people see Disney-inspired outfits and assume everyone's a cast member, and she was sorry we had to deal with that. I asked if it was really that common, and she confirmed it was, especially with Disney bounding getting more popular. She mentioned they'd had to escort people out for pretending to be characters, even when they didn't mean to. That made me feel a little better about our decision to walk away. The last thing we wanted was to end up banned from our favorite place because some entitled parent couldn't understand the difference between guests and employees. But the story doesn't end there. About an hour later, when we were eating our Mickey-shaped waffles, a Disney security guard approached our table. He asked if we were the couple who were dressed as Snow White and Grumpy earlier. My heart dropped. We were in trouble. I said yes, but explained we didn't do anything wrong and had told her we weren't cast members. The security guard said he knew that. He then told us the woman who complained about us actually got herself ejected from the park. My husband asked what he meant. The guard explained that she had found a real cast member and started screaming about how Snow White and Grumpy were being rude to her children. When the cast member asked her to clarify, she showed them the photos she took of us. The cast member immediately recognized that we weren't Disney employees and called security. I asked if we were in trouble, and he said we weren't. In fact, he thanked us for handling it the way we did. He said they'd been watching that woman all day because she'd been harassing cast members, cutting in lines, and generally making everyone miserable. The incident with us was just the final straw. My husband asked what happens now, and the security guard explained that her whole family got escorted out and their tickets were revoked. She wouldn't be coming back anytime soon. I actually felt bad for her kids, but I was relieved that we had handled the situation correctly. It could have gone very differently if we had just given in and taken the pictures. The security guard left us with a couple of fast passes for our trouble, which was completely unnecessary but appreciated. We finished our dinner and actually had a great rest of the evening. Walking back to our car, my husband shook his head and said next time he was wearing a shirt that said he wasn't a Disney employee. I joked that next time we should Disney bound as villains because nobody wants pictures with Maleficent. He said I should speak for myself because he'd make a great Jafar. Despite everything, we're not giving up on Disney bounding. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.